What really happened to the dysfunctional Bluth family after the cameras stopped rolling? Arrested Development wasn't just a comedy. It was chaos, scandal, and brilliance wrapped into one. But behind the laughter, the real lives of its cast were often far more complicated, and sometimes far more shocking than anything the show ever dared to portray. The story didn't end when the series faded from television. In many ways, that was only the beginning. Before we dive in, I want to know, who was your favorite member of the Bluth family? Was it Michael trying to hold everything together, Job chasing illusions, Lucille with her razor-sharp wit, or Buster in his own bizarre world? Drop your answer in the comments, because by the end of this video, you might see them very differently. When Arrested Development first premiered in 2003, it didn't look like anything else on television. At a time when traditional sitcoms dominated the screen, this show broke every rule. It was fast, clever, layered with jokes that sometimes took multiple viewings to fully appreciate. Created by Mitchell Hurwitz, it told the story of the Bluth family, a once wealthy dynasty that suddenly lost everything, forcing them to confront a reality they had never truly understood. At the center was Michael Bluth, the only relatively sane member of a family that thrived on dysfunction. Around him were characters that felt exaggerated, almost absurd, yet somehow deeply real. A narcissistic magician desperate for attention, a manipulative, martini-loving mother, a naive son caught in the chaos, and a family dynamic that constantly spiraled out of control in the most hilarious ways. Critics loved it. Audiences who discovered it became fiercely loyal. But despite its brilliance, Arrested Development struggled to survive. Ratings never matched its acclaim, and after just 3 seasons, it was canceled in 2006. For many shows, that would have been the end. But Arrested Development wasn't like most shows. Years later, fueled by its growing cult following, it was revived by Netflix, bringing the Bluth family back into the spotlight. And while the revival reignited interest in the series, it also reminded viewers just how much time had passed, and how much the lives of its cast had changed. Because behind the scenes, these actors were living stories just as unpredictable as the ones they portrayed. Some quietly built lasting careers. Some stepped away from the spotlight entirely. And others faced personal battles, controversies, and moments that would redefine how the world saw them. The laughter never really stopped, but the reality behind it was far more complicated. Alia Shawkat stepped into the role of Maybe Funke at a very young age. But unlike many child stars, her journey after Arrested Development was remarkably steady. While the show gave her recognition, she never chased the spotlight in the traditional Hollywood sense. Instead, she quietly carved out a path in independent cinema, choosing roles that were unconventional, artistic, and often deeply personal. She appeared in a range of indie films and experimental projects, proving that her talent extended far beyond comedy. But what truly set Alia apart was her willingness to explore her identity outside of acting. She became deeply involved in painting, music, and creative collaborations, embracing a life driven more by expression than fame. In an industry where many young actors struggle with pressure and identity, her story stands out for its calm and control. There were no major scandals, no dramatic breakdowns, just a consistent evolution into a thoughtful, multidimensional artist. And in many ways, that quiet independence may be the most surprising transformation of all. Tony Hale, who brought the unforgettable and hilariously awkward Buster Bluth to life, experienced a very different kind of journey. Before Arrested Development, he was relatively unknown, but the role instantly made him one of the show's most beloved characters. Yet behind the comedic brilliance, Tony was dealing with something far more personal. He has spoken openly about his struggles with anxiety and self-doubt, even at the height of his success. The pressure of performing, combined with the unpredictability of the industry, often left him feeling uncertain about his place in it all. But instead of letting those struggles define him, Tony found stability through his faith and family life. And professionally, he achieved something many actors only dream of: reinvention. His role as Gary Walsh in Veep earned him multiple Emmy Awards, proving that his talent was far from one-dimensional. From an anxious performer unsure of his future to an award-winning actor with a grounded personal life, Tony Hale's story is one of quiet resilience and a reminder that even the funniest faces can hide the deepest battles. Portia de Rossi's journey may be one of the most layered and deeply personal among the Bluth family. As Lindsay Bluth Funke, she embodied confidence, beauty, and satire. But behind that image was a woman facing intense internal struggles. Before and during her rise in Hollywood, Portia battled severe eating disorders, driven by the pressure to meet impossible industry standards. It was a painful and often isolating experience, one she later revealed in her memoir with striking honesty. But perhaps the most defining moment of her life came when she publicly came out as gay, at a time when doing so still carried significant risk in Hollywood. That decision changed not only her career, but her life. Her relationship with Ellen DeGeneres became one of the most well-known and enduring partnerships in the entertainment world, symbolizing both personal happiness and cultural progress. Yet, despite her success, Portia eventually chose to step away from acting, prioritizing her well-being and a quieter life outside the spotlight. It was a bold decision in an industry that rarely slows down, but for her, it marked something more important than fame. It marked peace. Will Arnett turned Go Bluth into one of the most unforgettable characters in television comedy, a magician who was equal parts confident and completely incompetent. His performance was loud, ridiculous, and endlessly entertaining. And for a while, it seemed like that same energy carried into his real-life success. After Arrested Development, Will's career only grew stronger. He became a familiar voice in animation, most notably as the deeply complex and self-destructive BoJack Horseman, a role that revealed a much darker, more emotional side of his talent. It was a performance that surprised many, showing that behind the comedy was an actor capable of incredible depth. But off-screen, his life was far less stable. His marriage to fellow comedian Amy Poehler, once seen as one of Hollywood's strongest relationships, ended in a highly publicized divorce. Around the same time, Will struggled with alcohol, a battle he had faced earlier in life and one that resurfaced during this period. It was a difficult chapter, filled with personal setbacks and emotional challenges. But instead of fading, he rebuilt. Through voice work, television roles, and a renewed focus on his craft, Will Arnett managed to reinvent himself once again. His story isn't just about success. It's about falling, facing it honestly, and finding a way forward. Michael Cera's rise to fame was almost immediate. As George Michael Bluth, he became the awkward, lovable heart of Arrested Development. And almost overnight, he was everywhere, starring in hit films like Superbad and Juno, becoming one of the most recognizable young actors of his generation. But unlike many rising stars, Michael made a surprising choice. Instead of chasing bigger fame, he stepped away from the spotlight. At the height of his popularity, he deliberately shifted towards smaller, independent projects, avoiding the pressures of mainstream Hollywood. It wasn't a retreat driven by scandal or failure, but by intention. He valued privacy, simplicity, and creative control over celebrity status. In an industry built on constant exposure, Michael chose distance. Over the years, He continued to work steadily, often in quieter roles that matched his understated personality. While others chased headlines, he remained almost invisible by comparison. And yet, his influence never really disappeared. His story is unusual, not because of what went wrong, but because of what didn't. In a world where fame often consumes people, Michael Cera quietly stepped back and built a life on his own terms. Jessica Walter brought Lucille Bluth to life with a sharpness and precision that made the character iconic. Her biting sarcasm, effortless delivery, and commanding presence turned Lucille into one of the most memorable matriarchs in television history. But long before Arrested Development, Jessica was already a seasoned and respected actress. Her career spanned decades, with acclaimed performances in both film and television. Yet it was Arrested Development that introduced her to a new generation, giving her a late career resurgence that few actors experience. Behind the scenes, however, things were not always as polished as they seemed. In later interviews, Jessica spoke emotionally about tensions on set, particularly moments that left her feeling disrespected and hurt. Her honesty during those conversations revealed a vulnerability that fans had rarely seen. And yet, she remained graceful, professional, and deeply committed to her work. Even in her later years, she continued acting, including her beloved role in Archer, proving her enduring talent and dedication. When Jessica Walter passed away, it marked the end of an era. But her legacy lives on, not just in the characters she played, but in the strength, wit, and authenticity she brought to every performance. Lucille Bluth may have been ruthless and hilarious, but Jessica Walter gave her a soul that will never be forgotten. Jeffrey Tambor was already a highly respected actor long before he became George Bluth Sr., the manipulative, eccentric patriarch at the center of Arrested Development. With a career spanning decades, he had built a reputation as one of Hollywood's most reliable character actors, capable of shifting seamlessly between comedy and drama. His role in Arrested Development only strengthened that legacy, and later, his performance in Transparent brought him even greater acclaim, earning major awards and widespread recognition. For a time, it seemed like Jeffrey Tambor had reached the peak of his career, admired for both his talent and longevity. But everything changed almost overnight. Allegations of inappropriate behavior surfaced during his time on Transparent, leading to intense public scrutiny. The situation escalated quickly, and soon, Tambor was removed from the show that had defined his late career success. The fallout was immediate and devastating. Projects disappeared. His reputation, carefully built over decades, was suddenly questioned. It became one of the most talked about controversies in Hollywood at the time. While Tambor denied some of the accusations, the damage had already been done. The industry moved on, but not in his favor. For fans, it was difficult to reconcile the talented actor they had admired with the headlines that followed. His story became a stark reminder of how quickly a career, even one built over a lifetime, can be reshaped by controversy. And in the case of Jeffrey Tambor, the fall was as dramatic as the rise had been steady. Jason Bateman, the calm and rational Michael Bluth, often felt like the anchor of the entire show. On screen, he was the one trying to hold everything together while chaos unfolded around him. But in real life, his journey was far more complicated than the character he portrayed. Jason started his career as a child star, finding early success in television long before Arrested Development. But with that early fame came pressure, and eventually, a loss of direction. By his 20s, he was struggling with addiction and a lifestyle that pushed his career to the edge of collapse. Opportunities disappeared, and for a time, it seemed like he might become another cautionary tale of Hollywood excess. But then came a turning point. Bateman made the difficult decision to step back, confront his struggles, and rebuild his life from the ground up. Arrested Development became his comeback, a chance not just to return, but to redefine himself. And he didn't stop there. In the years that followed, he transformed into one of the most respected figures in the industry. His work in Ozark showcased a darker, more intense side of his talent, earning critical acclaim and proving that his abilities extended far beyond comedy. As a director and producer, he gained even more control over his creative path, solidifying a second act that many never achieve. Yet even his comeback wasn't without controversy. During interviews surrounding the Arrested Development revival, Bateman faced criticism for comments perceived as dismissive toward a co-star's experience. The backlash was swift, forcing him to publicly apologize and reflect on his actions. It was a reminder that even after redemption, the spotlight can still expose new challenges. Jason Bateman's story is not just about success or failure. It's about survival, growth, and accountability. From a struggling young actor on the brink of losing everything to a respected filmmaker and performer, his journey is one of the most dramatic transformations in the entire Bluth family. Halfway through, things are already getting intense. But the truth is, the most shocking stories are still ahead. So tell me, did any of this surprise you? And out of everyone we've seen so far, who do you think has lived the most dramatic life? Decades have passed since Arrested Development first introduced us to the Bluth family. A family that had everything, lost it all, and somehow remained impossible to forget. What started as a clever, unconventional sitcom slowly became something much bigger, a cultural memory shared by millions. But time has a way of rewriting every story. For some of these actors, life after the show brought stability, growth, and a sense of peace that Hollywood rarely offers. They found their rhythm away from the chaos, building careers that were quieter but deeply fulfilling. For others, the years that followed became a period of reinvention, stepping into new roles, new identities, and sometimes entirely new industries. And then there were those whose journeys took a darker turn. Controversies, personal struggles, and moments of public scrutiny reshaped how the world saw them. Careers that once seemed untouchable were suddenly fragile. Reputations built over decades were tested in ways no one could have predicted. Yet somehow, through all of it, Arrested Development remains untouched. Because what made the show special wasn't just its humor or its brilliance. It was how it reflected something real beneath the absurdity. The dysfunction, the misunderstandings, the desperate attempts to hold everything together. They weren't just jokes. They were fragments of real life, exaggerated but recognizable. And maybe that's why we keep coming back. Not just to laugh at Goeb's illusions or Lucille's biting remarks, but to reconnect with a time when these characters felt like part of our own world. A time when their chaos somehow made sense of our own. Because in the end, the Bluth family never really disappeared. They just became memories, ones that still feel alive every time we press play. If you enjoyed this journey through the lives of the Arrested Development cast, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more Then and Now stories. And tell me in the comments, what moment from the show will you never forget?